Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 642 Reigning Over Ignorance and Deception, Part 2. An evaluation of reasonable doubt, one of the deadliest drivers of lawlessness. The podcast objectives are reveal how you obtain superior spiritual intelligence, analyze how reasonable doubt generates misunderstanding, analyze how reasonable doubt neutralizes consideration, and analyze what it means to be beyond reasonable doubt. Welcome. Now, before we begin today's lesson, I would like to welcome all my beloved brothers and sisters in Yahushua Messiah who have been scattered to the four corners of the earth, who Yahuwah has joined to this ministry for such a time as this. I would also like to welcome anyone who is engaging our podcast or videos for the first time. We trust you were led by the set apart spirit in finding us. And if you continue to be led, we hope you stay with us. For these are troubling times, and an evil day is just ahead. To this end, if you are watching this video on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button below, and you will be alerted whenever we post new videos. Also, if you have any questions at the conclusion of this video, you can ask them using the link in the podcast description below the video player. Last but not least, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube can share it with believers like us. The door that leads to superior spiritual intelligence. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 652 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we completed our analysis of the primary illustration of consideration, i.e., the fundamental degree of knowledge. Enter a conductor who navigates the full breadth of your thought dimension in a spiritual train of thought. His mission is to purge your thoughts of any misconception, for in doing so, he eliminates the source of every error and or lie within your mind. Now, this speaks to the secondary role of consideration. Enter an investigator who evaluates every form of evidence within your mind to separate the truth from the lie. No doubt, this is a very crucial function, for as you have learned, your thought dimension is vast, for it contains near infinite space by way of the subconscious. Ergo, the work of consideration is massive and within and of itself a major miracle. My dear friends, just think about it. The moment stimuli enter your mind, your conductor sets off on a spiritual train of thought to determine the evolutionary procedure of the stimuli and to ensure that said stimuli is only used to foster the persistent elevation of your mind. Now, in most cases, This happens so quickly and efficiently that you don't even know it's happening when it's happening. And on other cases, you are dealing with matters that require more mental processing and power. In either case, consideration has the power to elevate the full breadth of your thought dimension to a higher spiritual plane, allowing you to unlock the power of superior spiritual intelligence. And the best part is that you will find it to be a natural process. Notwithstanding, we ended the most recent podcast by introducing the most dangerous threat to the security of your mind at this juncture. Enter reasonable doubt. And today, we will analyze the path you must follow to deal with this deadly driver of lawlessness to ensure that your spiritual train of thought stays on the track so that you, my friend, should never look back. Let's get started. A mental environment marred with misunderstanding. Now, first things first, reasonable doubt is in league with one of the seven deadliest drivers of lawlessness. Enter misunderstanding. That said, if you are keeping a list, then you know that the two deadliest drivers of lawlessness, which we have analyzed thus far in this exposition, are partiality and misunderstanding. Now, although reasonable doubt is not one of the top seven, I assure you that he is a force to be reckoned with. Along these lines, reasonable doubt has not only existed in your mind whilst you filled your mind with obedience and faith. My dear friends, reasonable doubt has grown. He has evolved. Look, look here, in an environment where he should have died, along with disobedience and the more basic form of doubt, he survived, and in a way, he has thrived. Therefore, I will resubmit the definition for reasonable doubt so that we can see the sheer power and threat of this spiritual disease. Once more, please. By definition, reasonable doubt is a degree of uncertainty that arises or remains upon fair and thorough consideration of the evidence or lack thereof, a form of doubt that does not defy reason and or logic, a measure of doubt that is not excessive. Now, by employing this definition, I will show you why reasonable doubt is the most dangerous threat to your mind at this juncture and how he works very hard to ensure your mind is plagued by misunderstanding. Let's get to work. Now, we should start by analyzing the goal of reasonable doubt and misunderstanding, for this is a key factor in crafting the appropriate strategy for the ensuing battle. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. Reasonable doubt works to create a mental environment that is marred with misunderstanding. That is a spiritual force that utilizes the weaknesses within your mind to prevent you from unlocking the power of understanding. Now, there are two key takeaways from this inflection point. First and foremost, it speaks to the power of understanding. Remember, understanding is the point of no departure in the progression of life. And thus, the following is true. Understanding is the most prominent degree of perfection as it pertains to our realization of the abundant life. We know this because the primary reason why many fail to experience the abundant life is because they don't understand what it is. And the primary reason why they lack understanding is because reasonable doubt has created a mental environment that is plagued by misunderstanding. And thus, we conclude the same way that consideration has the power to stop the progression of death before it starts, misunderstanding has the power to stop the progression of life by preventing you from unlocking the power of understanding. Now, this brings us to the second takeaway vis-a-vis misunderstanding plays on all the weaknesses within your mind, to wit, all the areas that are outside of the spiritual jurisdiction of obedience and faith. To our great misfortune, these weaknesses are consolidated and then they are weaponized to generate various measures of misunderstanding to prevent us from entering the progression of life. And the force that works to consolidate all the weaknesses within your mind is none other than reasonable doubt. To prevent you from unlocking the power of the evidence. Now, let's take a closer look at the definition of reasonable doubt to see how it creates an environment where misunderstanding can thrive. To begin with, reasonable doubt is a degree of uncertainty that arises or remains upon fair and thorough consideration of the evidence or lack thereof. Now, right off the bat, we can see many red flags in this definition. For starters, reasonable doubt has the power to neutralize the work of consideration. Alas, he can stop your spiritual train of thought before your conductor completes his route. And in doing so, he neutralizes the power of the evidence. We know this because reasonable doubt, by definition, can arise or remain upon fair and thorough consideration of the evidence. Here lies the problem vis-a-vis the primary objective of consideration is to evaluate the evidence. Remember, the evidence includes all the pieces required to complete the puzzle that reveals the will of Elohim. This is why your conductor is also an investigator. For as consideration navigates your thought dimension, she collects the evidence. And at the conclusion of the train route, she will have collected all the pieces required to complete the puzzle. Simple enough. Now, here's where reasonable doubt comes onto the scene. Vis-a-vis, he creates or reinforces a spirit of uncertainty to prevent you from unlocking the power of the evidence and making a sound conclusion. Here is how. Even with all the evidence you may have acquired via consideration and meditation, the enemy will magnify a crucial reality. To wit, you can't build a spiritual case solely off the evidence. On the rather, the evidence is used to prove a matter, but it is not the core matter. My dear friends, this is a crucial matter you must understand for more reasons than I could tell you. And yet, I will take the time to address three. Let's get to work. Now, First of all, you must be careful with your handling of the evidence. For, as consideration is a degree of knowledge, the evidence is a derivative of the sword of the Ruach, the most powerful weapon in your spiritual arsenal. Now, let me tell you something. Many fools have destroyed themselves by mishandling this sword. So be advised. Don't try to handle the sword of the Ruach if you don't know what you're doing. You'll get cut. Now, point number two, even though you need evidence to make your case, the evidence is not your case. Why? It's because any competent attorney can destroy your case if the evidence is your case. For in this case, all your evidence is inherently circumstantial. Now, if you think that's a problem, you're right. Now, get this. In the court of spiritual law, your competing attorney is Satan, a fallen angel who understands spiritual law better than most of us do. Ergo, if you make your evidence your case, he is going to defeat you. Listen to me. He will have a field day, and he will fill you with so much reasonable doubt that you, my friend, will be running the other way. Now, this brings me to my third and final point. Vis-a-vis, you must remember the purpose of the evidence in the grand scheme of knowledge. Ergo, I believe it is fitting for us to reconsider the definition of evidence. By definition, evidence is that which tends to prove or disprove something, something that makes plain or clear facts, information, etc., that give reason to believe that something is true. Now, the key lines in this definition reveals that evidence tends to prove or disprove something. That's the key, my friends. Vis-a-vis, as powerful as the evidence is, it does not have the power to establish the truth. On the rather, and at best, it is designed to be used as the proof. And thus, evidence also gives reason to believe that something is true. To wit, the evidence activates the power of reason on a higher spiritual plane. And trust me, this is a very big deal. However, reasonable doubt has the power to combat the power of reason on a higher spiritual plane. Remember, reasonable doubt is a form of doubt that does not defy reason and or logic. In effect, reasonable doubt combats reason and logic by not combating reason and logic. Okay, so we're getting into some next level spiritual warfare here. And I truly hope you are listening to these matters with your spiritual ears and seeing these matters with your spiritual eyes. As I say, this is the most critical juncture in your quest. My dear friends, you must believe me, you will get nowhere in your quest if you fail to pass this test. So hold on to your hats and take a deep breath and stay with me as we put the finishing touch on this podcast. Let's make it happen. Beyond reasonable doubt. Now, let's resume where we left off. Vis-a-vis, reasonable doubt is not only a force of power, but he is also a force of strategy. To wit, he doesn't try to combat the power of reason on the higher spiritual plane. On the rather, he combats the power of reason with the power of reason. Along these lines, reasonable doubt focuses on the limitations of the power of evidence. And as it is such a crucial focus in this battle, I will offer it as an inflection point. Consider this: reasonable doubt magnifies the fact that it is not reasonable to accept any matter as truth and facts if all you have is the evidence. Here lies the problem. To wit, at this interval in your quest, all you have is the evidence. Ergo, there are only two paths you can follow at this juncture. My dear friends, there are only two things you can do. Now, the first and most common path is the path of delusion. On this path, men and women who are not walking in the fear of Elohim stake their spiritual fortunes on bad data, errors, and lies. And although the basis of their case does not rise to the level of credible evidence, they are yet inclined to submit incomplete and faulty data in defense of the delusion they desire to believe is true. And should you follow this path, reasonable doubt is going to kill you. Now, the second path is the only path that has hope. To wit, you must concede the fact that it is not reasonable to establish truth and facts upon evidence alone. And if you don't believe me, I ask you once again to consider the courts. As I say, a prosecutor cannot walk into a courtroom with a case that is based on circumstantial evidence and expect to obtain an immediate conviction. As I say, this is folly. Ergo, a competent prosecutor will invest the time to build the most complete case. In doing so, he or she will look to establish means, motive, and opportunity to tell the tale of what happened. And the evidence is used to support the tale, which reveals what really happened. Not only this, but there are strict laws upon what can be classified as evidence and the processes that were used to obtain the evidence. And the procedure of a trial is conducted to determine the strength of each case in light of the evidence. Now, what it all comes down to is this: spiritual law is the blueprint for competent courts, which render verdicts based upon the weight of all the evidence and how said evidence is used to establish an affirmative case, which in this case is to know. To wit, our mission is to affirm that we have an adequate foundation, i.e., case, to receive the knowledge of Elohim. Remember, Yahuwah won't put more on you than you can bear. Ergo, you will never receive knowledge from Elohim if you cannot handle the knowledge he desires to share. Now, that said, the question we should chiefly entertain is this: how can you prove to the Most High Elohim that you are qualified to receive the knowledge he desires to share? The answer is as obvious as it is sure. Vis-a-vis, you must prove it. In law terms, you, my friend, must meet your burden of proof. Along these lines, to meet your burden of proof suggests that you have eliminated all reasonable doubt. Hence the phrase, beyond reasonable doubt, a phrase which reveals that you have made your case to the point where there is no more reason to doubt. Now, that said, the question of the hour is quite simply this: how do you meet your burden of proof so that you can eliminate all reasonable doubt? The answer is sure, and it will be the topic of our next podcast. Here again, this is the most critical interval in our quest. And so I encourage you to stay with me if you're with me, and we will reconvene on this topic in 2 days. As always, my dear friends, stay locked in, watch and pray, and Yahuwah bless you until then. Now, here is the final word. Each case you make will be thrown out if you're plagued by reasonable doubt. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, this podcast ties directly into our Word from a Watchman series and the reason why many fail to do greater works. It's because they are being plagued by doubt, and not just any doubt. Alas, they are being plagued by the deadliest form of doubt. We know this because the enemy has situated this driver of lawlessness at the intersection of the progressions of life and death. And this is why we know knowledge is the critical degree of power and at the heart of the most critical interval in our quest. Heretofore, I recommend never underestimate reasonable doubt. Rather, deal with him as early and as often as you can. For the man who gains the victory over reasonable doubt is the man who gains the power to understand. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on today's lesson. And if you have any questions, please submit them using the form at pinnacleofholiness.com. And I will respond to you as soon as I can. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 642, Reigning Over Ignorance and Deception, Part 2. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 643, Reigning Over Ignorance and Deception, Part 3. I will post this podcast on Wednesday, April 15th, 2026. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim, continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.